So, today I want to take things all the way back to ancient Egypt, and I want to talk about the story of Isis and Osiris, which is a story of divine counterparts. And I was kind of inspired to dive into this topic after doing that Aubrey Marcus video, because if you know about the situation with Aubrey Marcus, he basically is trying to repackage his non-monogamous relationship as this divine counterpart, divinely aligned situation. And a lot of people had a lot to say about that, myself included. And I think it's interesting that he referenced the goddess Isis as though Isis came through him and spoke to him and led him onto this journey that he's now on. And ever since he brought that up, and ever since I did my response to that, I've just been kind of sitting with this energy of what it means to be a divine counterpart, and the story of Isis and the story of Osiris and some of the Egyptian lifetimes that I've had and guides that I have been kind of like emerging, coming to the fore through this process for me to look at. And I wanted to kind of share that story and share my interpretation of it with you. So, the story of Isis and Osiris. Osiris was the first king of Egypt and ultimately became the lord, the god of the underworld. And Isis, who was his sister and also his divine lover. And I think that this is an interesting point to touch on here. I think that when we encounter these stories in mythology and ancient history and things like that, where we encounter like the brother and the sister also as lovers, I think that this is speaking to the concept of the divine counterpart as being, one in the same. Like you are, the other part of this person, right? And so it's not brother and sister in the sense that like how we think of brother and sister, right? I think it's more on a soul level. You are cut from the same cloth. You have the exact same soul frequency. And so oftentimes, like when we encounter people that have like a very similar energetic soul frequency, even if we've never met them before, even if they are of no relation to us, they can often feel like we already knew them, right? They feel familiar, they feel like family. So I think that the reference to brother and sister here in this situation is important. So they were known as brother and sister, they were known as lovers. And Osiris's brother, Set, in a fit of rage and jealousy, murders Osiris and basically chops him up and scatters the pieces of him all over Egypt. So this is an interesting part of this story to me because I think it really speaks to the experience of the divine masculine. So the brother, right, can be seen as like an aspect of the self. I kind of see it as the ego self. So the ego self is always going to be fueled by these kind of heavier aspects of the self, whether it's envy, jealousy, greed, lust, whatever those heavier, more dense energies that are often expressed through the ego, through the needs, wants, and desires of the ego. And in the story, it's the brother coming in and taking the action to kill Osiris, to kind of take him off his path, away from his lover, and break him apart into a million pieces. And I think that this often appears in the path of the divine masculine as the programming that a lot of men have taken on, whether it's from their families, from their peers, from society in general, that kind of moves them away from their connection to their soul, in a sense, their ability to listen to the calling of their soul and their higher self. And what happens is that the soul self becomes fragmented. So if we think of masculine energy as kind of like this direct force and flow of energy, which is going to be at its strongest and most powerful when it is focused in a committed, clear way. But what happens when the energy is broken apart and it's fragmented is that the internal power source is weakened. And so this is really easy to see when, you can, even if you are a woman or a man or whatever, it doesn't matter. When we're talking about the energies of masculine and feminine, we all embody these energies within us in our own ways. And so we are all a balance of the masculine and the feminine. These are aspects of all of us. And so while for me, I tend to speak from a heteronormative point of view because that's the way that I experience the world, this the polarity of masculine and feminine exists within all of us and expresses itself through all of us. And for you, that may have a totally different story to it. It may manifest in a totally different way than it does for me. So just keeping that in mind whenever you hear anyone talk about the masculine and the feminine, these are always aspects of ourselves. And so if you've ever experienced, like in your own life, times where maybe you've felt like you were spreading yourself too thin, like let's say maybe you had a goal that you really wanted to accomplish, but you had all these other people that were needing things from you, places that you were giving your energy that were draining you. The more that you've taken on that is not in alignment with that goal, the harder it is to complete that goal, to make it to that goal, right? Because your energy is not driving forward directly towards the goal. It's scattered elsewhere, right? And you can feel this also in relationships to other people. So like if you are not showing up fully for another person and your energy is kind of scattered, to lots of other different people and whatever, not only is that felt by all of the people involved, but your ability to grow with one person is going to be um, inhibited somewhat by the fact that your energy is not fully present. So I think, of both of those examples, everybody has probably experienced those things, one or both of those things in some form or another. And so when this energy of like the jealous brother comes in and rips the two lovers apart, this is very consistent with the experience of being on the path of the divine counterparts, because what has to happen in this separation is that the two counterparts have to go through these really expansive processes of finding themselves again within the space that the separation has created. So for Isis, there was a story told in Egypt for centuries that the flooding of the Nile was the tears from Isis's grief over the death of her lover. And so the grief that the divine feminine has to go through in this separation is part of the process of her, if we think of like the divine feminine as like connected to the element of water. So this is like the aspect within ourselves that is flowing. It's our emotional nature. And if we think of like the ability of water to bring life, to clear things away, like think about how, you know, the city, if you live in a city, the city feels cleaner after it rains, right? Like the rain comes in and it like washes away what needs to be washed away. And it's kind of the same thing with grief. It's like we experience this ebb and flow of emotion and grief, and it's a process of clearing away that which is stagnant, that which needs life brought back into it, that which needs to be healed. And Isis is known as a goddess of rebirth, of fertility, of love, of beauty. And I think that going through the process of losing this aspect of yourself, because remember we talked about, you know, this brother and sister aspect, this like counterpart mirrored aspect of self. It's like in losing that, in the like perceived space that is created there, there's a push to empower the self, to rise in the self. And so in the story, Isis, you know, taps into her magic, her power, her yeah, just her sacred magic, her ability to like take off and travel across Egypt and find all of the missing pieces of her lover and bring him back together and help him to like resurrect. So there's a couple of things here with that aspect of the story, right? So if we think about the impulse of the feminine to save, to heal, to put the pieces back together, right? Like, and when this is done from a disempowered state, it is, you know, completely toxic to the feminine, right? So if you, you know, you might have experienced this in your own feminine aspects, like that over nurturing, the over giving, the wanting to fix other people, wanting to save other people. And it's very similar to the masculine, like that, what happens when the energy is fractured and fragmented. What happens when the feminine overgives is that she loses her power, her strength, her ability to hold her own space, right? And so when she is empowered and she is in her magic and her magnetism and her, you know, she's embodied into her strength, she, her energy, like I think of this like the process of bringing Osiris back into wholeness, like on the path of the divine counterpart. This is absolutely the energetic frequency of the feminine. So the feminine, in rising in her power and rising in her magic and rising in her awareness of self and, you know, wholeness and alignment within herself, this energy just naturally pulls all of those fragmented pieces back into place for the masculine. It's like a light that guides him back together. So he starts to kind of come back into wholeness because she is holding her frequency of, you know, autonomy and divine strength and purpose and power. And so he, you know, is, because they are these mirror reflections of one another, he is guided back to wholeness, right? And so after they come back together, they create their child, Horus, and Horus ends up avenging the, you know, his father's death. And I think even that, it's like, I thought maybe this video like wouldn't be very long, but it's like there actually is so much to say here because there's so many like little parallels to just the way, you know, the way that life is. And when the masculine and the feminine come together and they create this third energy, they create the child, often it is the journey of the child to break the karmic cycle, right? So like whatever karmic cycle they were born into. It's often the path of like the divine child to then set free that the karma of the family line and like reemerge. And Horus has his whole story, and his, you know, he is the divine protector, like the everyone's probably seen the Eye of Horus. So and then ultimately Osiris ends up becoming the god of the underworld. So very much symbolic of, like, the whole story is very much symbolic of death, rebirth, resurrection, justice. And if you feel connected at all to the path of the divine counterparts, and you, in my opinion, will know if you truly are on this path. I know that there's so much information out there now about it, and it can feel like really easy to kind of fall into like trying to, you know, explain away a toxic relationship that you're in by calling it like a twin flame or something like that. But if you are truly on the path of the divine counterpart, I know, at least for me, this is something that you've probably known on some level your entire life, whether you had the words to explain it or not. And there, you will resonate with stories like this because you understand deeply the way that it mirrors your own experience, and how your ability, like what this journey really is calling you into the path of your highest self and calling you to embody your destiny and your highest calling, which is not necessarily an easy path to walk. It's not going to be the path that most other people are going to be on or are going to understand. And you will often find, I think, when you are on this path, that as much as you may try to be normal or, you know, reject it, um, you will always be led back to it, because the path that you're on is divinely guided, and it's serving a major purpose here on the planet right now of sort of shifting the energy of the planet. And I do feel like we are kind of alive right now at a time where a lot is transforming and transitioning, and there's a lot of like indigo children and like star seeds and like people that are like waking up in this lifetime, that are here with a specific mission to, you know, tap back into these codes of like divine sacred love, and to anchor these templates like back into the planet now. So if you have any questions, comments, please leave them down below. And I think I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk with you again soon.